What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for NFL Week 4. Final look.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over each position and break down a couple of my favorite players for this NFL DFS main slate. And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made. Oh, and good news, guys. Make sure to stay tuned to the very end of this video because we removed the box that was popping up and blocking the lineup. So now you can see a full lineup using these picks that we made in this video if you stay to the very end. Okay, guys, NFL Week 4. Let's take a look at the quarterback position. So, yes, I like Josh Allen. I like Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, but if I'm going to pick one of these studs, I think I'm going to go with the guy with the lowest ownership who's got just as much upside as all those guys, and you're going to save some salary with this pick. So I like Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks playing the San Francisco 49ers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Russell Wilson has averaged 23.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 3.7 rush attempts per game. Now, I like this pick because he's only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 20.6 fantasy points here in Week 4. He's 7,100 DraftKings salary and 600 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Seahawks trailing by 2.5. So you got a high-scoring game, a good matchup, in what could be a passing game script. So I like Russell Wilson here versus the San Francisco 49ers. Okay, now one of my favorite plays at the quarterback position is Kirk Cousins from the Minnesota Vikings playing the Cleveland Browns, who have a pretty good defense overall. They've been middle of the pack defending opposing quarterbacks, but Kirk Cousins, he's averaged 26.1 fantasy points per game on the season. He gets an average of 1 rush attempt per game. He's going to be about 6% owned, projected at 19.4 fantasy points here in Week 4. But I think he can score 22 fantasy points or more in this one, and he's 6,400 DraftKings salary and 1,100 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Vikings trailing by 2. So Kirk Cousins has been fantastic to start the season. He's got a core of great wide receivers. It's going to be a high-scoring game and a passing game script. So I like Kirk Cousins here versus the Cleveland Browns. Okay, now if you want to save some salary at the quarterback position, take a look at Matt Ryan from the Atlanta Falcons playing the Washington football team, who have the absolute worst defense overall, and they give up the absolute most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. Now, Matt Ryan is only averaging 15.4 fantasy points per game on the season, but that's largely due to his poor performance in Week 1, where he only scored 7 fantasy points. He scored 22 and then 17 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. So this guy can get it done. He can score 20 plus fantasy points, especially in this matchup. And he's only going to be about 2% owned. Oh, he's getting just about 2 rush attempts per game. He's projected at 17.6 fantasy points here in Week 4, and he's only 5,400 DraftKings salary, and he's 1,300 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, and they have the Falcons trailing by 1.5. So just the best possible matchup on paper. Could be a passing game script. Everyone's down on Matt Ryan. He hasn't played that well so far in the season, But really, if you throw out week 1, he's averaging about 19 fantasy points a game in week 2 and 3. So he's not doing that bad, and his salary is super low, and his ownership is low. So I like Matt Ryan here versus the Washington football team. Okay, everyone, it's time to announce the winner of our $25 weekly PayPal giveaway. And the winner is Cooper Sumner. Cooper Sumner, congratulations. You are the winner of this week's $25 PayPal giveaway. Please reply to our comment to collect your prize.
Before I continue with the picks, I'm excited today because we added a new contest for everyone watching.
If you want to enter the drawing for $25 PayPal,
all you need to do is like this video, hit that subscribe button, and make a quick comment below to be entered into the drawing. We'll reply to a random comment and let you know that you won.
And we'll send you $25 PayPal.
So it's that easy,
and we pick a new winner every Saturday and announce them in our video.
So get your comment in now so I can add another entry for you.
Oh, and the other quarterback that I like, who I think his ownership is way too low, is Aaron Rodgers from the Green Bay Packers playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall. They're middle-of-the-pack defending opposing quarterbacks. Aaron Rodgers, now he only averaged 16.4 fantasy points per game on the season, but just like Matt Ryan, he had an awful week 1 that's pulling that number down. He only scored 3 fantasy points in week 1, but then he scored 27 and 19 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. He gets an average of 1.3 rush attempts per game. And I like this pick because Aaron Rodgers is only going to be about 2% owned, projected at 20 fantasy points here in week 4. And he's $6,800 DraftKings salary and $800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 45.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 6.5. Now, I like this pick largely because of his low ownership, but also Davante Adams has a fantastic cornerback wide receiver matchup that we'll get into a little bit later. So I think he could have a 3+ touchdown performance here. So I like Aaron Rodgers here versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Okay, let's take a look at the running back position. So for my running back stud, if I'm going to pay up at running back, it's a coin flip between Derrick Henry and Alvin Kamara. Both these guys are right around the same salary. I think they've got similar upside here in week 4. So Derrick Henry is going to be about 16% owned. Alvin Kamara is going to be about 13% owned. Get one of those guys in your lineup. But if you want to save some salary at the running back position, this is a guy who I think is going to have a fantastic week 4. Take a look at Nick Chubb from the Cleveland Browns playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the 3rd worst defense overall, and they're middle of the pack defending opposing running backs. Nick Chubb has averaged 16.1 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 16 rush attempts per game and 1 pass target per game. Now, he's only going to be about 2% owned, so I like that low ownership. He's projected at 15.7 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $7,000 DraftKings salary and $1,000 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Browns favored by 2. So, although he only scored 8 fantasy points last week, that's why his ownership's going to be so low. He's coming off of a bad week, but he got 22 rush attempts last week. So if he can get 20+ touches here in week 4 versus the Vikings, I think he can put up some pretty big numbers at low ownership. So I like Nick Chubb here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, now this running back, I was going to say he's going under the radar, but his ownership is actually pretty high. I think he's going to be a great play this week. I like David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears playing the Detroit Lions, who have the 4th worst defense overall, and they give up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing running backs. David Montgomery has averaged 13.4 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 15.3 rush attempts per game and 3 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 73% of the snaps. He touches the ball 42% of the time, and he's going to be about 16% owned, projected at 15.8 fantasy points here in week 4. And I like this pick because he's only $5,800 DraftKings salary. Although he is $1,700 more on FanDuel, I love that DraftKings price. Vegas thinks there's going to be 41 points scored in this game, with the Chicago Bears favored by 3. So he's got a fantastic matchup in what could be a running game script. So I like David Montgomery here versus the Detroit Lions. Okay, let's take a look at the wide receiver position. So I mentioned him before. I like Davante Adams from the Green Bay Packers playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 6th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Davante Adams has averaged 22.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 11.3 pass targets per game. He got 18 pass targets last week, scored 34 fantasy points. Those are just eye-popping numbers. He's on the field for 83% of the snaps. He's going to be about 19% owned, projected at 22.4 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $7,900 DraftKings salary and $200 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 55.5 points scored in this game, with the Packers favored by 6.5. So I like this pick because Davante Adams has a great cornerback matchup here. He's going to be matched up against James Pierre, who's giving up 0.45 fantasy points per route run. So I think he's going to run all over James Pierre, put up 2+ touchdowns in this one. And that's why I think it makes sense to stack him with Aaron Rodgers. And Aaron Rodgers has got low ownership, so I think that's a sneaky stack. So I like Davante Adams here versus the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all the tools for NFL, MLB is still going, NBA is right around the corner. This is a great time to get in and try everything for 1 month. The tools are all about saving research time. You can see the last 3 games, the fantasy points per game, the targets they got per game, so you can see how involved they are in the offense, the rushes they got per game. Seeing all this stuff on one screen helps you save time and make better picks. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Another wide receiver I like is Terry McLaurin from the Washington football team playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 10th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Terry McLaurin has averaged 17 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 8.3 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 99% of the snaps. He's going to be about 9% owned, projected at 16.9 fantasy points here in week 4. He's $6,900 DraftKings salary, $200 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Washington football team favored by 1.5. Now, Terry McLaurin also has a favorable cornerback matchup. He's going to be matched up versus Fabian Moreau, who's giving up 0.47 fantasy points per route. It's a great matchup, so I like Terry McLaurin here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, I also like DJ Moore from the Carolina Panthers playing the Dallas Cowboys, who have a middle-of-the-pack defense overall, and they give up the 8th most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. DJ Moore has averaged 20.3 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 10.3 pass targets per game, and he's on the field for 81% of the snaps. He's going to be about 21% owned, projected at 17.2 fantasy points here in week 4. He's 6,600 DraftKings salary, 700 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 52 points scored in this game, with the Panthers trailing by 4.5. So he's got a good matchup in a high-scoring game in what should be a passing game script for the Panthers. He's getting a ton of pass targets. He's been super productive. So I like DJ Moore here versus the Dallas Cowboys. Okay, now this is probably my favorite wide receiver pick on the slate. I like Odell Beckham Jr. from the Cleveland Browns playing the Minnesota Vikings, who have the 3rd worst defense overall. They give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers. Odell Beckham Jr. scored 14 fantasy points in his Week 3 debut. He got 9 pass targets, had 1 rush attempt. He was on the field for 78% of the snaps. He's only going to be about 6% owned. He's projected at 14.1 fantasy points here in Week 4. And he's only 5,800 DraftKings salary, 800 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 51.5 points scored in this game, with the Browns favored by 2. So this is probably going to be the last time you're going to get Odell Beckham Jr. for 5,800 DraftKings salary. I think his salary is way too low, considering he scored 14 fantasy points off of 9 pass targets last week, even got a rush attempt. And on top of all of that, he's got a fantastic quarterback matchup here. He's going to be matched up versus Bashaud Breeland, who's giving up 0.83 fantasy points per route run against. So Odell Beckham Jr. just at a fantastic spot here. Great matchup, high scoring game, low ownership compared to his upside. So I like Odell Beckham Jr. here versus the Minnesota Vikings. Okay, moving on to the tight end position. I like Logan Thomas from the Washington football team playing the Atlanta Falcons, who have the 7th worst defense overall, and they give up the 5th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Logan Thomas has averaged 11.6 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 4.7 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 100% of the snaps. He's only going to be about 4% owned, projected at 11.5 fantasy points here in Week 4. He's 4,900 DraftKings salary, 900 more on FanDuel. We know Vegas thinks there's going to be 47.5 points scored in this game, with the Washington football team favored by 1.5. So this is a great matchup. And Logan Thomas has scored double-digit fantasy points in each of all 3 weeks so far this season. So he's been super productive. Gotta love a guy that's on the field for 100% of the snaps. Plenty of opportunity. And he's pretty low ownership here at only 4%. So I like Logan Thomas here versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now I also like Noah Fant from the Denver Broncos playing the Baltimore Ravens, who have the 6th worst defense overall, and they give up the 2nd most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Noah Fant has averaged 9.7 fantasy points per game on the season, getting an average of 5.7 pass targets per game. He's on the field for 80% of the snaps, going to be about 9% owned, projected at 11.6 fantasy points here in Week 4, and he's 4,300 DraftKings salary and 1,400 more on FanDuel. Vegas thinks there's going to be 44.5 points scored in this game, and they've got this one almost even, just favoring the Baltimore Ravens by 0.5 point. So this is a great matchup in a close, competitive game. So I like Noah Fant here versus the Baltimore Ravens.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smiggity smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again and good luck.